The manila envelope sitting on my kitchen counter contained enough evidence to destroy my marriage, and Henry had compiled every single piece while I thought I was being clever. But let me start from the beginning, when I still believed I could have my cake and eat it too. The bass from Eliot's downtown bar thrummed through my chest as I leaned closer to him across the polished mahogany counter. At 32, I felt like I was finally living again after 7 years of suburban monotony with Henry. My phone buzzed incessantly on the bar top, another text from my husband. "Henry again?" Eliot asked, his green eyes sparkling with mischief as he poured me another cosmopolitan. At 29, he had this effortless charm that made me feel like the most interesting woman in the room. "He's so paranoid," I said, deliberately placing my phone face down, always checking up on me like I'm some teenager. The truth was, I'd told Henry I was working late on the Morrison account. It wasn't entirely a lie. I had stayed at the office until 6, but then Carla, my younger sister, had texted me about meeting Eliot for drinks. She'd been encouraging me to live a little for months, claiming Henry was holding me back from my potential. "You deserve better than constant surveillance," Eliot said, reaching across to brush a strand of hair from my face. "A woman like you should be appreciated, not monitored." My phone lit up again. Henry's name flashed on the screen, along with a photo of our 7-year-old daughter Maya in her school uniform. The message read, "Maya asking when Mommy's coming home. It's past her bedtime. Everything okay?" I felt a pang of guilt, but Eliot was already suggesting we move to a quieter booth in the back. The bar was packed with young professionals unwinding after work, and I felt intoxicated by the energy. Or maybe it was the alcohol. Either way, I sent Henry a quick reply. "Client dinner, running late. Don't wait up." "There," I said, sliding my phone into my purse. "Problem solved." Eliot grinned and led me to a corner booth where the lighting was dimmer and more intimate. We talked for hours about everything: my dreams of traveling, his plans to open his own restaurant, how we both felt trapped in our current situations. He listened in a way Henry hadn't in years, asking follow-up questions and remembering details from our previous conversations. "You're incredible, Desdemona," he said, using my full name instead of the Des that Henry had shortened it to years ago. "Your husband doesn't know how lucky he is." As the night wore on, other patrons filtered out until we were among the last customers. Eliot's shift ended at midnight, and he suggested we grab coffee at the all-night diner down the street. My phone had been buzzing periodically, but I'd been ignoring it completely. The diner was nearly empty, except for a few late-night workers and insomniacs. We slid into a red vinyl booth, and Eliot ordered us both coffee and pie. The conversation grew more personal, more flirtatious. He told me about his failed engagement, how his ex-fiancée had been controlling and jealous. I found myself sharing things about Henry that I'd never voiced before, how he'd become predictable and boring, how he never surprised me anymore, how I felt like we were just roommates, raising a child together. "Life's too short to settle," Eliot said, reaching across to take my hand. "You only get one shot at happiness." When I finally checked my phone, it was nearly 3 a.m. I had 17 missed calls from Henry and a dozen text messages, starting concerned and escalating to frantic. "Des, please call me back. I'm worried. This isn't like you. I called your office. Security said everyone left hours ago. I'm about to call hospitals. Where are you?" The last message was timestamped at 2:47 a.m. "I'm staying awake until you get home. We need to talk." "Shit," I muttered, showing Eliot the messages. "He's completely overreacting." "Sounds like a control freak to me," Eliot said, squeezing my hand. "But you better get going before he calls the cops or something crazy." The drive home through empty suburban streets gave me time to craft my story. I'd say the client dinner ran incredibly late. Then some of us went for drinks to celebrate closing the deal. I'd act offended that Henry didn't trust me and turn his suspicion back on him as a character flaw. But when I pulled into our driveway at 4:23 a.m., I saw Henry silhouetted in the kitchen window. The house was dark except for that one room, and I knew he'd been sitting there for hours, waiting. I took a deep breath, checked my appearance in the rearview mirror, and prepared for battle. Henry was indeed sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, still wearing the blue button-down shirt and khakis he'd worn to his accounting firm that morning. His dark hair was disheveled, and his usually neat appearance looked haggard. But what caught my attention was what he was holding: my backup phone, the old one I thought I'd hidden in my car's glove compartment. "We need to talk," he said quietly, his voice eerily calm. "Henry, what are you doing with that?" I demanded, trying to sound indignant rather than panicked. "Have you been going through my car?" He set the phone on the table between us. The screen showed a text message from Eliot. "Amazing night, beautiful. Can't wait to see you again tomorrow. Sweet dreams." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to remain calm. Attack was the best defense. "I can't believe you're invading my privacy like this," I said, tossing my purse onto the counter with more force than necessary. "This is exactly the kind of controlling behavior that's been suffocating our marriage." Henry's brown eyes, usually warm and patient, looked tired and hurt. "Desdemona, you've been gone for over 12 hours. You lied about where you were. And now I find messages from some guy telling you how amazing your night was together." "Eliot is a friend," I said, crossing my arms defensively. "And that message could mean anything. We had a great conversation about business opportunities. You're reading into it because you're insecure." "Business opportunities?" Henry's voice remained level, which somehow made it more unsettling than if he'd been yelling. "At 4 in the morning?" I moved to the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of water, buying myself time to think. Through the kitchen window, I could see the first hints of dawn creeping across our neighbor's rooftop. Maya would be waking up in a few hours, expecting her normal Saturday morning routine of cartoons and pancakes. "Look, I know you're upset," I said, softening my tone slightly, "but you're blowing this completely out of proportion. Yes, I stayed out later than planned. Yes, I should have called more often, but nothing inappropriate happened." "Then why lie about the client dinner?" "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this." I gestured toward the phone on the table. "I knew you'd get jealous and paranoid if I mentioned having drinks with friends, so I simplified the story to avoid drama." Henry picked up the phone and scrolled through something. "These messages go back 3 weeks, Des. This isn't a one-time thing." My stomach dropped, but I maintained my defensive posture. "We're friends, Henry. I'm allowed to have friends. Just because you don't have any social life outside of work and your mother doesn't mean I have to live like a hermit." That was a low blow, and I saw it hit its mark. Henry had always been more introverted, preferring quiet evenings at home to the social scene I craved. His mother, Linda, had been increasingly critical of me over the years, sensing something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "This isn't about having friends," Henry said. "This is about honesty, about respect, about the fact that our daughter went to bed crying because Mummy wasn't here to read her a story." The mention of Maya sent another pang of guilt through me, but I pushed it down. "Don't you dare use Maya to manipulate me. I work hard to provide for this family too, and sometimes that means long hours and networking events." "Networking events," Henry repeated flatly. "Is that what we're calling it?" I slammed my water bottle on the counter. "I'm not doing this, Henry. I'm exhausted, and I'm not going to stand here and be interrogated like some criminal because you can't handle me having a life outside this house." I started toward the stairs, but Henry's voice stopped me. "I took photos," he said simply. I turned back, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Photos of what?" "Your purse, your phone, the messages, the timestamps." He was still sitting calmly at the table, but there was something different about his demeanor, a quiet resolve I'd never seen before. I also checked our bank statements: $47 at Eliot's bar last night, another $32 at Murphy's Diner. The receipts are time-stamped. My mouth went dry. Henry handled all our finances, so I'd forgotten he could track my spending. So what? I bought drinks and food. That's not a crime. No, he agreed. But lying about it is a problem. And doing it while your family worries about you is a bigger problem. I could hear Maya stirring upstairs. She was an early riser, even on weekends. Soon she'd be padding downstairs in her cartoon pajamas, expecting her normal, happy Saturday morning. The thought of her seeing us like this, tense and angry in the kitchen, made me feel sick. Fine, I said, trying to sound conciliatory. You're right, I should have been more honest about my plans. I'm sorry I worried you, but this whole spy routine isn't healthy for our marriage, Henry. If you can't trust me, we have bigger problems than one late night out. Henry stood up slowly, pocketing both phones, mine and the backup. You're right about one thing. We do have bigger problems. He walked past me toward the stairs, pausing at the bottom step. I'm going to shower and get ready for work. When Maya wakes up, please don't involve her in whatever story you're planning to tell everyone about last night. It's Saturday, I called after him. Why are you going to work? Because I have some research to do, he said without turning around. Some calls to make. The way he said it sent a chill down my spine, but I told myself I was overreacting. Henry was hurt and angry, but he'd cool down. He always did. By the time he got home from whatever Saturday work he was doing, I'd have prepared a proper apology and explanation. I'd smooth this over like I always did, but as I heard the shower turn on upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The Henry who'd been sitting at that kitchen table wasn't the same patient, forgiving man I'd married 7 years ago. Maya's footsteps pattered overhead, and I heard her bedroom door creak open. Soon she'd be downstairs, asking for breakfast and wondering why Daddy was in the shower so early on Saturday morning. I needed to get my story straight, and fast. 2 weeks later, Linda Vale's backyard barbecue was supposed to be a chance for me to prove that everything was normal. Henry's mother had invited the whole family. His brother Brian, with his wife Jennifer, my sister Carla, even my mother Rosa had driven down from Portland. It was Maya's favorite kind of family gathering, with her cousins running around the yard and all the adults focused on her adorable chatter. But the atmosphere felt strained from the moment we arrived. Henry had been politely distant since our kitchen confrontation, going through the motions of normal married life without any real warmth. He'd sleep on his side of the bed, make coffee for both of us in the morning, and ask about my day. But it all felt performative, like he was playing the role of husband rather than being one. Des, honey, you look tired, Linda said when we walked through her back gate. She was arranging potato salad on the picnic table, but her sharp blue eyes were studying my face with that penetrating look she'd perfected over 60 years of motherhood. Just busy at work, I replied, forcing a bright smile. The Morrison account is keeping me on my toes. Henry was already helping his brother Brian set up the grill. Their conversation focused on charcoal temperatures and weather predictions. Maya had immediately run off to play with her 8-year-old cousin Tyler, leaving me to navigate the family dynamics alone. How are things with you two? Linda asked quietly, nodding toward Henry. He seemed different when he called this week. We're fine, I said, perhaps a bit too quickly. You know how Henry gets when work is stressful. He overthinks everything. Linda's expression suggested she wasn't buying it, but before she could probe further, Carla arrived with a bottle of wine and her usual dramatic flair. Sorry I'm late, my sister announced, kissing my cheek and shooting a cool look toward Henry. Traffic was insane coming from downtown. Carla had been my strongest supporter throughout the recent tension. At 34, she was 2 years older than me, but had never married, preferring what she called her freedom to what she saw as the suffocating institution of marriage. She'd been encouraging my friendship with Eliot, insisting that I deserved excitement and attention. Where's this mysterious bartender friend of yours? She whispered as we walked toward the drinks table. I thought you were bringing him. I never said I was bringing Eliot, I hissed back, glancing around to make sure no one had overheard. Why not? You said he was just a friend. Friends come to family barbecues all the time. Before I could explain why that would be a terrible idea, I heard a familiar voice calling my name from the back gate. Desdemona, hope I'm not too late for the party. My blood turned to ice. Eliot Warren stood at the entrance to Linda's backyard, holding a 6-pack of craft beer and wearing his most charming smile. He looked casually perfect in dark jeans and a fitted grey t-shirt that showed off his lean build. Eliot? I managed to croak out. What are you doing here? Carla invited me, he said, walking over to kiss my cheek in greeting. She said it was a casual family thing and that you could use some moral support. I shot a murderous look at my sister, who was grinning like she'd just pulled off the prank of the century. Surprise, she said. I figured it was time for everyone to meet your friend. The conversations around the yard had gradually quieted as people noticed the newcomer. Henry looked up from the grill, his face carefully neutral, as he took in Eliot's presence. Brian raised his eyebrows questioningly. Linda's mouth had formed a thin, disapproving line. Everyone, this is Eliot, Carla announced loudly. He's the friend Des has been telling us about. I haven't been... I started to protest, but Eliot was already moving around the group, introducing himself with easy confidence. Henry, right? He said, walking over to my husband with his hand extended. I've heard so much about you. Thanks for letting me crash your family party. Henry shook his hand politely, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. I wasn't aware Desdemona had invited anyone. Oh, I didn't invite him, I said quickly. This is a surprise. A good surprise, I hope, Eliot said with that boyish grin that had charmed me at the bar. I brought some of that IPA you mentioned loving, Des. I had never mentioned loving any IPA to Eliot, but before I could correct him, Linda was asking pointed questions about how we knew each other and what he did for work. Eliot handled it all smoothly, mentioning the bar where he worked and making it sound like we'd met through mutual friends rather than during my solo evening out. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself in an impossible position. Eliot was being perfectly friendly and appropriate, but his very presence felt like a threat to the careful story I'd constructed about our relationship. Every time he laughed at one of my jokes or complimented my appearance, I could feel Henry's eyes on us. You two seem close, Jennifer observed during a lull in conversation. Brian's wife was a sweet woman, but she had a talent for making innocent comments that landed like grenades. We have a lot in common, Eliot replied before I could answer. Des is one of the most interesting people I've met in a long time. She has all these dreams and ambitions that she doesn't get to explore enough. Really? Linda's voice was deceptively casual. What kind of dreams? I wanted to disappear into the ground, but Eliot was already launching into a description of my supposed desire to travel, to take cooking classes, to learn photography, things I might have mentioned during our late-night conversations, but that sounded absurd in the context of my actual life as a working mother. That's funny, Henry said quietly. You've never mentioned wanting to take cooking classes. Well, maybe if we talked about something other than work and Maya's schedule occasionally, you'd know more about my interests, I snapped, immediately regretting the harshness of my tone. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Maya looked up from her game with Tyler, sensing the tension even if she didn't understand it. Mummy, why are you using your angry voice? She asked innocently. I'm not angry, sweetheart, I said, forcing my voice back to normal. Mummy's just tired. But the damage was done. I'd publicly criticized Henry in front of his family, making him look like an inattentive husband while defending my relationship with another man. Carla looked pleased with the chaos she'd created, but everyone else seemed shocked by my outburst. Henry excused himself to help Linda in the kitchen, and I saw Brian follow him inside. Through the window, I could see them having an intense conversation while Linda nodded grimly. Well, this is awkward, Eliot said with a laugh, apparently oblivious to the family dynamics he'd disrupted. Maybe I should head out. No, stay, Carla insisted. Everyone's just being dramatic. But I could see the writing on the wall. Linda emerged from the kitchen with a folder in her hands, the same folder she'd been carrying when she'd cornered Henry earlier that week. My mother-in-law walked directly to Henry and handed it to him with a meaningful look. "What's in the folder?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Linda's smile was razor-sharp. "Just some photos from my security camera. Amazing what you can see from my driveway, including the street where Eliot's apartment building is located." My heart stopped. Linda lived on Maple Street, which had a clear view of the downtown area where Eliot's building sat. If her camera had captured my car parked there overnight... Henry opened the folder and studied its contents without expression. Then he looked up at Eliot with something that might have been pity. "I think you should leave now," he said quietly. The barbecue was effectively over. Monday morning at the office felt like walking into a minefield. My desk was exactly as I'd left it Friday afternoon, but somehow everything felt different, exposed, precarious. The Morrison account files sat in their neat stack, a reminder of the lie that had started this whole mess. "Rough weekend?" asked Janet Morrison, my cubicle neighbor, as she settled in with her coffee. Janet was one of those perpetually cheerful co-workers who somehow managed to know everyone's business without seeming nosy. "Just family drama," I said, powering up my computer and hoping she'd drop it. "I heard about the barbecue," she said. "My sister lives on Linda's Street. She mentioned there was quite a scene in the backyard." My fingers froze over the keyboard. "What did she hear?" "Oh, you know how these things get blown out of proportion," Janet said with a wave of her hand. "Something about a mysterious man showing up uninvited and your husband asking him to leave. I'm sure it's nothing serious." But I could see from her expression that she was fishing for details, and I realized that Linda's neighborhood gossip network had probably already spread the story across half the suburb. By the time it reached my office, who knew what version people were hearing? "It was just a misunderstanding," I said firmly. "My sister invited a friend without checking with me first. No big deal." Janet nodded, but I caught her exchanging a look with Sandra from accounting. Word was already spreading through the office grapevine, and I needed to get ahead of it. Around 10 a.m., I got a call from HR asking me to come in for a brief meeting. My stomach clenched as I walked down the hallway to Patricia Webb's office, trying to look calm and professional. "Desdemona, please sit down," Patricia said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. She was a stern woman in her 50s, who'd been with the company for over a decade. "I wanted to discuss some concerns that have been brought to my attention." "What kind of concerns?" Patricia opened a file on her desk. "It's regarding your attendance and some discrepancies in your reported hours, specifically the evening of June 15th, when you claimed to be working late on the Morrison account." My mouth went dry. "I was working late that night. According to building security, you left the office at 6:17 p.m. The Morrison files show no activity after 5:30 p.m., but you submitted a timesheet claiming work until 11 p.m. I felt trapped. I took some files home to work on. Sometimes it's easier to concentrate there." "Did you take any files home that night?" The question hung in the air like a sword. I couldn't lie outright. They could easily check what files had been signed out. But admitting the truth would unravel everything. "I may have been mistaken about which night I worked late," I said carefully. "Sometimes the days blur together when you're putting in long hours." Patricia's expression suggested she wasn't buying it. "Desdemona, falsifying timesheets is a serious matter. I'm going to need you to review your submitted hours for the past month and make any necessary corrections. We'll schedule a follow-up meeting for Thursday." I walked back to my desk feeling like everyone was watching me. The whispered conversations seemed to stop when I passed, and I was probably imagining the suspicious looks, but paranoia was setting in fast. During lunch, I called Carla from my car in the parking lot. "You completely screwed me over yesterday," I said, without preamble. "I was trying to help," she protested. "You've been complaining about Henry for months. I thought if everyone could see how much happier you are with Eliot around." "Happy? Carla, Linda had security camera footage of my car parked outside his apartment building. Henry knows I lied about where I was that night. There was a pause. Okay, that's not ideal, but maybe it's for the best. Maybe this will force you to finally admit what you really want. What I want is to keep my family together. Do you, though? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you want your boring husband to pay the bills while you have fun with your bartender boyfriend. The accusation stung, because it wasn't entirely wrong, but hearing it stated so bluntly made me realize how selfish it sounded. It's not that simple, I said. Isn't it? Look, Des, you're 32 years old. You have one life. Do you want to spend it pretending to be happy in suburbia, or do you want to actually live? After I hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, thinking about what Carla had said. Was I really that transparent? Had everyone been able to see my dissatisfaction except me? My phone buzzed with a text from Henry. Picking Maya up from school today. We'll be at Mum's for dinner. Don't wait up. It was the first communication I'd received from him since the barbecue disaster. The formal tone and the message itself, that he was taking our daughter to his mother's house without me, felt ominous. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried texting back, asking if I should meet them at Linda's, but got no response. When I got home that evening, the house felt eerily quiet. Maya's backpack wasn't by the front door, and Henry's work shoes weren't in their usual spot by the coat closet. On the kitchen counter, I found a note in Henry's careful handwriting. Maya is having a sleepover at Grandma's. We need some space to think. Please don't call or come by tonight. We'll talk tomorrow. The dismissive tone sent a spike of anger through me. Who was Henry to decide unilaterally that we needed space? Who was he to keep Maya away from me without discussion? I called Linda's house, but it went to the answering machine. I tried Henry's cell again, voicemail. I even tried calling Brian, but Jennifer answered and said he was busy and couldn't come to the phone. They were freezing me out, and it was infuriating. Around 9 p.m., Eliot texted, "Heard yesterday got intense. You okay?" I found myself pouring out the whole story. The HR meeting, Henry's cold shoulder, the family's obvious disapproval. Eliot listened sympathetically and suggested I come by the bar for a drink and some friendly conversation. "I don't think that's a good idea," I typed back. "Why not? You're already in trouble. Might as well enjoy yourself." He had a point. If everyone was going to treat me like I'd committed some unforgivable sin, why should I sit home alone feeling guilty? But as I sat there with my car keys in my hand, something stopped me. Maybe it was the thought of Maya sleeping at Linda's house, confused about why Mommy wasn't there to say goodnight. Maybe it was the realization that going to see Eliot now would prove every accusation Henry had made. Or maybe it was the envelope I noticed sitting on the hall table, an envelope that definitely hadn't been there when I left for work that morning. My name was written on it in Henry's handwriting, and it was sealed with the kind of formal precision he used for important documents. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a printed timeline. June 15th, Desdemona leaves office at 6:17 p.m. Security footage. June 15th, Desdemona's car captured on Linda's security camera at 11:43 p.m., driving toward downtown. June 16th. Desdemona's car parked outside 847 Pine Street, Eliot Warren's address, from 12:15 a.m. to 4:10 a.m. June 16th, Desdemona arrives home at 4:23 a.m. Below the timeline was a note. "I've made copies of all evidence and given them to my attorney for safekeeping. We'll discuss this tomorrow evening when I bring Maya home." My hands were shaking as I read it again. Henry had hired a lawyer. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. This was about legal consequences. And I was completely unprepared for what was coming next. Maya came home from school the next day with a drawing she'd made in art class, a picture of our family standing in front of our house. But in her 7-year-old's interpretation, Mommy and Daddy were standing on opposite sides of the paper, with a big space between them, and Maya was in the middle, her crayon arms stretched wide as if trying to bridge the gap. "Do you like it, Mommy?" she asked, holding up the paper proudly. It's beautiful, sweetheart, I said, my throat tight. Why did you draw us so far apart? Maya shrugged with the casual honesty of childhood. That's how you stand now. And Daddy's been sad, so I thought maybe if I drew us all together, he'd feel better. Henry walked into the kitchen at that moment, having arrived home from work earlier than usual. He looked at Maya's drawing over my shoulder, and I saw something flicker across his face. Pain, maybe, or resignation. It's perfect, Maya Bear, he said, using his pet name for her. Should we put it on the refrigerator? As Maya carefully positioned her artwork with magnets, Henry and I stood in awkward silence. He looked tired, older somehow than he had just weeks ago. His usually neat appearance was slightly disheveled, and I noticed he'd been wearing the same blue tie 3 days in a row, something the old Henry would never have done. We need to talk, he said quietly, once Maya had run upstairs to play. Henry, about the timeline you left me. Not here, he interrupted. Maya doesn't need to hear this. Let's go to the backyard. We sat at the patio table, where we'd shared countless family dinners and weekend conversations over the years. The evening air was warm, and I could hear Maya's music playing faintly from her bedroom window. It should have been peaceful, domestic, normal. Instead, it felt like a funeral. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Henry began, his hands folded on the table between us. About us, about what I want, about what's best for Maya. Henry, I know you're hurt, but let me finish. His voice was calm but firm. I've spent the last week trying to figure out how we got here. When did we stop talking? When did you stop being happy? When did I become the enemy? I wanted to interrupt, to defend myself, but something in his tone made me stay quiet. I keep thinking about that night you stayed out until dawn, he continued. Not just because you were with him, but because of how you handled it afterward. The lies, the gaslighting, the way you made me feel crazy for being concerned about my wife's safety. I never meant to. You told me I was paranoid, controlling. You said I was imagining things because I was insecure. Henry's voice remained steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. But I wasn't imagining anything, was I? The question hung between us like a challenge. I could continue lying, continue trying to minimize what had happened, or I could finally tell the truth. But the truth felt too big, too destructive. Nothing physical happened, I said finally. I know how it looks, but Eliot and I are just friends. Henry reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I printed out your text messages from that old phone, the one you thought you'd hidden. My stomach dropped. Henry, you had no right. Can't stop thinking about last night, he read aloud. When can I see you again? Henry's working late Thursday. Maybe we could grab dinner. I wish I could be honest about how I feel. Each message felt like a slap. I'd forgotten how flirtatious our texting had become, how intimate and secretive it had felt to have someone to confide in about my marriage problems. Those messages, they're taken out of context, I said weakly. Henry folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. Desdemona, I'm not stupid, and I'm not going to sit here and let you insult my intelligence by pretending this is all innocent. So what do you want me to say? That I've been unhappy? That I felt ignored and taken for granted? That talking to someone who actually listens to me felt good? My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Fine. Yes, I enjoyed the attention. Yes, I liked feeling interesting and desirable again. But that doesn't make me a terrible person. No, Henry agreed. But lying about it does. Sneaking around does. Staying out all night while your daughter wonders where Mommy is does. The mention of Maya hit like a physical blow. Don't use her against me. I'm not using her against you. I'm trying to protect her from the fallout of your choices. Henry stood up and walked to the edge of the patio, looking out at the yard where Maya's swing set sat empty. Do you know what she asked me yesterday? I didn't want to know, but I could see he was going to tell me anyway. She asked if you were going to move away like Tommy Morrison's mommy did. Apparently, there's been some playground talk about divorce because of what happened at Mum's barbecue. The thought of Maya worrying about me leaving made me feel sick. Henry, I would never abandon Maya. But you would abandon our marriage? The question caught me off guard. Would I? A month ago, I would have said no automatically. But sitting there in the gathering dusk, looking at my husband's tired face and thinking about Eliot's easy smile and exciting conversation, I wasn't sure anymore. I don't know, I said honestly. I don't know what I want. Henry nodded slowly, as if my answer confirmed something he'd already suspected. Well, I know what I want. I want a wife who comes home at night. I want a partner who's honest with me. I want Maya to have a stable, secure home. And if I can't give you that, then we'll need to make some changes. He walked back to the table and sat down across from me. I've already started the process. What process? I've consulted with a lawyer. I've documented everything. The timeline, the messages, the lies, the financial records showing your spending at bars and restaurants. I've gathered witness statements from family members about your behavior. My blood turned to ice. You're threatening to divorce me? I'm not threatening anything. I'm preparing for the possibility that our marriage can't be saved. Henry's voice remained maddeningly calm. If you want to work on this, if you want to rebuild what we had, I'm willing to try. But it would require complete honesty, cutting off contact with Eliot, and probably marriage counseling. And if I don't agree to your ultimatum, then I'll file for separation and seek primary custody of Maya based on your recent behavior patterns. The casual way he said it made my head spin. You can't take Maya away from me. I don't want to take her away from you, but I won't let her grow up in a home where one parent is sneaking around and lying to the other. She deserves better than that. I stared at my husband, really looked at him for the first time in months. The man sitting across from me wasn't the pushover I'd been taking advantage of. He was someone who'd been pushed too far and had quietly, methodically prepared for war. You've been planning this, I said. I've been protecting my family, he corrected. The question now is whether you want to be part of that family or not. Before I could answer, Maya's voice called from the back door. Daddy, Mommy, can we have ice cream for dessert? Henry smiled at our daughter with genuine warmth, the first real smile I'd seen from him in days. Of course, Maya Bear. Come pick a flavor. As Maya ran toward us, chattering about her day at school, I realized that Henry had just given me a choice. But the way he'd presented it, with evidence and witnesses and legal documentation already in place, made it clear that he'd been preparing for this moment long before I'd realized we'd reached a breaking point. The question was, what was I going to choose? I woke up Thursday morning to the sound of Maya's laughter drifting from the kitchen, where Henry was making her favorite Mickey Mouse pancakes. For a moment, lying in our bed listening to my family's morning routine, I could pretend everything was normal. But then I remembered the conversation we'd had on the patio, and reality crashed back down. I'd spent 2 sleepless nights thinking about Henry's ultimatum. Cut off contact with Eliot, submit to marriage counseling, accept that I'd been wrong about everything, or face divorce and a custody battle I wasn't sure I could win. The rational part of my brain knew what I should do. Eliot was a bartender I'd known for a few weeks. Henry was my husband of 7 years and the father of my child. The choice should have been obvious, but something inside me rebelled against Henry's calm, methodical approach to our crisis. The timeline, the evidence gathering, the lawyer consultations. It all felt so cold and calculated. Where was the fighting? Where was the passion? Where was the man who would fight for our marriage instead of documenting its failure? I came downstairs in my robe to find Maya at the kitchen table, carefully cutting her pancakes into perfect squares while Henry packed her lunch for school. Morning, Mummy, Maya chirped. Daddy made extra pancakes if you want some. That's sweet, baby, I said, kissing the top of her head. But Mummy's not very hungry this morning. Henry glanced at me but didn't comment. He'd been unfailingly polite since our patio conversation, treating me like a houseguest he was trying not to offend. After Maya left for school, Henry poured himself a second cup of coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table with his laptop. The domestic scene felt surreal. My husband working from home while I tried to figure out whether I was about to destroy my marriage. "I have that follow-up meeting with HR today," I said, hoping to provoke some kind of reaction. "About the timesheet issue?" Henry asked without looking up from his screen. "Yes, they want me to explain the discrepancies." "You should tell them the truth." The simple statement hit me like a slap. The truth would get me fired. "The lies might get you fired too," Henry replied, "and they'll definitely get you in more trouble if they find out you falsified official documents." I stared at my husband, trying to understand when he'd become so coldly logical. The old Henry would have been worried about my job, would have helped me figure out a way to minimize the damage. This Henry seemed to view my professional problems as natural consequences of my personal choices. "Don't you care what happens to me?" I asked. Henry finally looked up from his laptop. "Of course I care, but I can't fix this for you, Desdemona. You created this situation. You have to deal with the consequences." The meeting with HR went exactly as badly as I'd expected. Patricia Webb had done her homework, cross-referencing my timesheets with building security logs and finding multiple discrepancies over the past month. I tried to explain them as honest mistakes, but my credibility was already shot. "We're placing you on administrative leave pending a full investigation," Patricia informed me. "You'll need to surrender your building access card and company laptop." Walking out of the office with my personal items in a cardboard box felt like the lowest point of my life. My co-workers watched with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity as security escorted me to the parking garage. By tomorrow, everyone would know I'd been suspended for falsifying records. I sat in my car for a long time, trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't go home and face Henry's "I told you so" expression. I couldn't call my mother, who still didn't know the full extent of what was happening. Carla would just encourage me to see this as an opportunity to start fresh, which wasn't what I needed to hear. Almost without thinking, I found myself driving to Eliot's bar. It was barely noon, but the place was open for lunch service. Eliot was behind the bar, polishing glasses and chatting with a couple of regulars. "Des," he said, his face lighting up when he saw me. "This is a nice surprise. Shouldn't you be at work?" "I got suspended," I said, sliding onto a bar stool. "Apparently, staying out all night with you has consequences." Eliot's expression shifted to concern, mixed with something that might have been guilt. "Shit, I'm sorry. I never meant for you to get in trouble at work." "It's not your fault," I said, though part of me wondered if that was true. "I made my own choices." He poured me a glass of wine without asking, the same Pinot Grigio I'd been drinking the night we met. "So what happens now?" "Henry has lawyers and evidence, text messages, security footage, financial records. He's threatening divorce and custody of Maya." Eliot set down his glass. "Maybe your husband has a point about the lying and sneaking around." I felt slapped. "I thought you cared about me." "I do, but you're married with a kid. I'm just a bartender who likes fun. I never signed up to be while your family falls apart." His words were ice water. Eliot wasn't my romantic hero, just a 29-year-old enjoying no-strings flirtation. Now with real consequences, he was backing away fast. "Maybe go home and work things out. For your daughter's sake." I left, humiliated. One day, lost my job, discovered the man I'd risked everything for didn't actually want me. At home, Henry sat with his attorney, James Morrison, surrounded by papers. "Separation papers and custody arrangement," Henry said. "You chose when you went to see him today instead of coming home. We have parking lot footage." Henry had been following me. "Joint custody, Henry primary residence, 6 months spousal support," the lawyer explained. "Or we go to court with evidence of adultery, abandonment, and workplace misconduct." Henry had frozen our accounts. Maya's school was notified. While I'd thought I was having harmless fun, Henry had been planning everything. I had only myself to blame. The late nights, lies, secret phone, public humiliation, all my choices. When Maya came home, Henry said, "I really hoped you'd choose differently." 3 months later, I lived in a one-bedroom apartment, temping. Maya stayed weekends. Henry dated Maya's teacher, someone who helped with homework and never stayed out with other men. Eliot moved to Seattle, texting, "Sorry things got complicated." I was learning to live with consequences, one lonely evening at a time.